scripture reading this morning comes from the Gospel of John, chapter 12, verses 1 through 8. Listen for what God's Spirit might be speaking to you this morning. 6 days before the Passover, Jesus came to Bethany, the home of Lazarus, whom he had raised from the dead. There they gave a dinner for him. Martha served. Lazarus was one of those at the table with him. And Mary took a pound of costly perfume made of pure nard and anointed Jesus' feet and wiped them with her hair. The house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. But Judas Iscariot, one of the disciples, the one who was about to betray him, said, "Why was this perfume not sold for 300 denarii, a year's wages, and the money given to the poor?" He said this not because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief and kept the common purse and used to steal what was put into it. Jesus said, "Leave her alone. She bought it so that she might keep it for the day of my burial. You will always have the poor with you, but you do not always have me." Let us pray. God, may you bless our time reflecting upon this passage this morning. May your Spirit move amongst us and energize us to service in your name. Amen. On this particular day in my memory, my freshman year of college, and I walked into the cafeteria. This was a small school, so there was only one dining hall. I know, like U of M or some other big schools, there's multiple campuses, but at my little school, there was just one dining hall, and I walked in there with my tray of food, trying to find my friends to sit with. And for whatever reason, happenstance that day, none of my normal friends were there at lunch. So I saw another guy who was in my freshman seminar class and went over and sat down. He was sitting with some other folks that I didn't know. And I sat down, unbeknownst to me, into a sprawling debate among all these other college cohort of mine, covering all kinds of different topics. And I was trying to pick up what was going on, a little bit bewildered. And I don't remember all the ins and outs, but I remember this one part that stands out to me, where my classmate made this very impassioned defense of communism. College freshman, thinking about things. And one of the other students at the table shot back, "Yeah, but it doesn't work. People have tried it, it's been done, it's been implemented, it doesn't solve poverty. And in fact, in some cases, it makes things worse for those who are the poorest." To which my classmate replied, "Well, you only say that because it hasn't worked yet." Well, the similar exasperation, the similar sort of defeatist attitude that the other student expressed. Look, there's still people living in poverty, no matter what we try. People struggling to meet their basic needs. That sort of sense of, well, what do we do? That's shared by some people who read this scripture passage today. Particularly when they read Jesus' words, "You will always have the poor among you, but you will not always have me." Believe it or not, there are Christians, we might say Christians, who cite this passage, these words of Jesus, in order to dissuade others from helping the poor. Because the way that they read this statement, what Jesus is saying, is asserting some sort of inevitability about human society. Or even worse, some people read it as a sort of theological claim. God predestines some people to be poor. And then you add on to the fact that Judas is the one making the counter-argument. That doesn't look good. And then add a layer on top of that sort of devoutly devotionalist, focus on Christ at all costs and block out anything else in the world. And you end up with this very distorted theology that somehow manages to read Jesus as being against the poor, or at least removed and unconcerned. Well, I mean, as I read from y'all's facial expressions, that is a very convoluted and upside-down understanding of the gospel and of Jesus. But even more so, this passage doesn't even support that kind of a reading in truth. Jesus' statement where he says, "You'll always have the poor among you," the context for that, which those who were there present with him, they would have known this, because he's referring to something in Deuteronomy. In Deuteronomy 15, that same phrase starts out a command from God. And it reads, "There will always be the poor in the land. Therefore I command you, be open-handed towards all those who are in need, with generosity." And so Jesus is alluding to this verse where God commands the Israelites, you must take care of everyone who is in your midst, particularly those who don't have enough, who don't have a way to take care of themselves, who are struggling. And so he's pointing that out, even as he is defending Mary and this very prodigal gift that she brings in, oil worth a year's wages that she pours out upon his feet. Jesus isn't shaming or blaming the poor or dismissing them. He's not making theological claims that somehow destitution is, divinely commanded or ordained. Jesus himself, in all his ministry, is siding with and can be found with those who are on the outskirts. Those who, due to their circumstances, due to their abilities, their physical or mental or spiritual abilities, were cast out. Jesus always was found, not always, but often was found, with those who were in places of economic hardship. So then we return to Judas. And I wonder if we should take Judas's question a little bit more seriously. I mean, John, the author of John, puts in these parenthetical comments to let us know, don't listen to this guy, right? He says, Judas, who was about to betray Jesus, hint, hint, and then, he didn't actually care about the poor. He just liked to siphon some of those funds off for his own pocket. So we hear Judas's response in that negative light. But there's part of me that wonders if he's raising something significant, right? The issue of caring for the poor is throughout the Bible. What would Judas's words sound like if they were coming from Peter? If Peter were the one saying, wait a minute, Jesus, aren't we supposed to help the poor? What if we did that instead? It sounds a little different. And indeed, the Bible actually has hundreds of verses about poverty, about economic justice. Some estimates go as high as 2,000 verses that kind of touch on these topics. There's an organization called Sojourners that aims to steer more evangelical Christians towards a deep concern for justice and poverty by pointing out how replete the Bible is with God's concern for those who have the most need. And in the early days of Sojourners' work, the founder, Jim Wallace, tells this story about how one of the ways he would illustrate this was he took a Bible and he went through cover to cover, and every time he found a verse that talked about poverty or how we should use our wealth or care for the orphan, the widow, the outcast, he cut it out. And so he would go on tour and hold up this Bible and fan it out, and there were just all these holes to make the point in a very visceral and visual way. If you remove questions of care for the poor and poverty from the Bible, you are left with a very spotty despite his ulterior motives, is one that actually gets at a very recurring theme in Scripture. And so we kind of have to deal with it in a way. Where's the line between what is generous and what is wasteful? Mary's offering, she anoints Jesus' feet. The whole house is filled with this perfume and fragrance. It is extravagant. It is beautiful. It is heartfelt. It is a moment of being totally present right there, her and Jesus, and everyone else sort of absorbing it. A year's worth of wages in that bottle poured out in, a matter of minutes, seconds perhaps? And so this is a question that churches have to ask ourselves too. Should congregations, should we shift our resources? Should we just close our doors and give all the proceeds directly to those who are in need? Should that energy and time and spirit and money go towards the alleviation and the eradication of poverty and justice, or do we focus on, as Mary did, serving Jesus, being present to the image of Christ in the person who is right before us? Because each of us, each person bears the image of Christ. Should we just not buy a cup of coffee take our friend out for coffee and put that $5 towards, well, $10 if you get the taller, fancier stuff. Put that, towards an organization working towards, or hand it to the person next to the overpass. But friends, this is a false dichotomy, I think. Our faith does not demand that we choose between working for justice, eradicating poverty, helping those in need on one hand, and giving our time and attention and care and love and sometimes our money to people right before us, the person we are interacting with. Those two things are not as at odds as Judas would have us to believe. And in fact, I think we should be wary of any doctrine, any theological statement that sets up an unwinnable either-or situation, where you choose one and you lose out on the other, you choose the other, and you lose out on this other side of the gospel. No, the gospel is a holistic message. Jesus is clear. Yes, live your life with your hands out, your hearts open to those who are most vulnerable, those who are most cast aside, and center those people. Bring them in. Those on the margins, bring them to the center. And he still also defends Mary, saying, yes, also, be fully present. Be right there with the person before you. Give them your love and extravagant attention and honor. Be fully in that moment with whoever you're with. That is a precious and invaluable gift also. And indeed, Jesus, the next chapter, if you keep reading, he does the same thing Mary did for him. He washes his own disciples' feet. That's coming up, chapter 13. In my own life, my maternal grandparents excelled at this aspect, this lavishing of attention upon people. There were 7 of us grandkids, and my grandparents lived in Chicago. The rest of the family was spread out all over. And they decided that when each of their grandchildren turned 12 years old, they would fly us to Chicago, just the one of us, for a couple days to stay with them. And we could drive around the city, we would do whatever, do what we wanted to, and get to have these couple uninterrupted days with our grandparents. Not in a setting where the whole family was gathered, but it was a moment where they just showered their attention on you. You were the one grandkid here with us. Let's have a good time. And it felt so special to be there, to be the center of attention. You weren't competing for attention with others or other things going on. And there was something joyful even in just the ordinary aspects of it. I remember my grandfather showing me his egg poacher machine, which was a revelation to me. And I can remember going with my Nana to sit at the farmer's market where she had a table for the mission committee of her church that was selling donuts for, I think it was a scholarship fund or something. And then I can remember playing many, many games of cribbage with my grandfather that afternoon. Never winning. I suspect and I hope that each of you can call to mind a time where you felt that specialness, that sense of being seen and honored by the way someone just gave their attention to you so devotedly, in a similar way that Mary does with Jesus, offering something that was beyond measure, beyond what you could quantify or put a dollar amount to, just with the amount of time. Jesus and Mary, they both understood the value of this anointing. They could see beyond the monetary value and recognize there was a preciousness to this gift beyond the Judas, like I pictured him with like the dollar signs in his eyes, as you might in a cartoon. But Jesus in particular, he was aware his time was limited. He says, "You will not always have me with you." This happens a week before his crucifixion. So where Judas sets up this trap that would indeed make the Pharisees proud, I think, Jesus sees through that false choice that Judas is proposing. Must we help the poor or serve Christ? And Jesus, in a word, says, yes, both. Serve those who are in need, and you serve Christ also. Honor the person before you, and you honor the Spirit of Christ that is within them. And friends, there is tremendous amount of grace and wisdom in this. Yes, he says, God commands you, live generously towards those in need, seek to ameliorate poverty and situations that bring it about. And pause and share your attention, share your care, yes, maybe sometimes your money, with others as well. Honor your neighbor, recognize the Christ in your neighbor. This too is an act of faithfulness to the gospel. And so Jesus actually opens up for us more ways to live faithfully, rather than fewer. Is it this or is it this? No, it is both. Both and. Friends, this is the good news of the gospel this morning. That our faith is lived both in being attentive and present to those who are before us, and in working for justice and lifting up those who are most in need amongst us. These are both deep acts of faith. Thanks be to God. Amen.
Amen.